This video is now in session, and today we're going to talk about the Canada snap election. We've made one video on this, but the election is very close to the day. Well, we actually have only one day left until the election occurs. So in today's video, we're going to give a brief overview of how this election will work, why this election was called, and how it will most likely end out. And then on September 21st, we'll release another video based on the results of the election, and we'll kind of give our take on it after the election has occurred. So we're not going to do a prediction like we did with the California recall election or the Georgia Senate election. That's primarily because we're not qualified enough to make a prediction. We're not that well versed in Canadian politics, but essentially what's happening here is this snap election is happening on the fly. And the reason why is because there's a rule stating that the Prime Minister of Canada can call an election that is supposed to be scheduled for some time at an earlier date than scheduled. So if we see here, 2015, 2011, 2019, these elections happen every 4 years, but you can call an election earlier than expected if you are the prime minister. So that's what Justin Trudeau did. He did exactly that, and around a month ago, he initiated an election that would happen on September 20th, 2021. So Justin Trudeau, the reason why he wants to do this is because of his situation at the parliament. In 2019, Trudeau's Liberal Party lost seats in the parliament, and because of that, Justin Trudeau's party no longer had a majority in the House of Commons. You need 170 seats for a majority, and he had a majority before 2019, but after 2019, he had 157 seats, 13 seats shy of actually getting the majority. So he now had to coalesce with other, or he now had to create a coalition with other parties, which is not really what he did, but rather what he's decided to do is that he will insert legislation as usual, and then will hopefully mix and match with other parties as the Liberal Party crafts their agenda. So they've been doing that with the Bloc Quebecians, and then the New Democratic Party and the Green Party. But in 2021, or at least last month, Justin Trudeau's approval rating started to heighten a bit, and that's because of his vaccination rollout. His vaccination rollout has been pretty swift, and his COVID cases, he's generally fared better than the United States when it comes to COVID numbers. So that put him at a higher approval rating than some of the other politicians, than compared to his past, and as well as other politicians in the United States. So that's why he called a snap election. Now, how is it going? It's kind of backfiring on Trudeau. The reason why is because a lot of Canadians, even though they had positive approvals of Trudeau, they really didn't think that an election was necessary, and they questioned why an election should be taking place in the middle of COVID-19, especially when there is a surge going on right now with the Delta variant. So because of that, a lot of people were questioning Trudeau's actions, and then Erin O'Toole, the leader of the opposition party, who is the Conservative Party, kind of highlighted that and stated that Trudeau is trying to power grab. And as of now, that kind of statement seems to be resonating among a lot of Canadian voters. So if we look at the polls, right now they're practically even between the Conservatives and the Liberals, and we only have one day left until the election occurs. So the Liberals can't really do much about their situation right now. They initially started off higher, but the Conservatives started gaining traction as more people questioned why this election was happening in the first place. And honestly, it is in some ways a power grab. Trudeau wants a majority in the government, and right now he sees this as a good time to get one. But this is kind of indicative of what of Trudeau's career. You could describe Trudeau's career a lot like Barack Obama's. He started off as this kind of inspirational candidate that was there to rally Canadians, but then as he rose to power and as he started gaining seats, or as he started crafting his legislation, he started being more establishment and more moderate than expected. So people increasingly became frustrated at Trudeau, and that's why we saw in the 2019 election Trudeau lost seats and no longer had a majority. You can see that he rose to power in 2015, and right now we're in 2021, meaning that it's been 6 years of Justin Trudeau. And as prime ministers stay as prime ministers for longer and longer periods, people usually become more frustrated. That's exactly what happened in the 2016 election, where people became frustrated at the lack of action in government and blamed that at the top, blamed it on Barack Obama and to an extension the Democratic Party. And then in Germany's election right now, 2021, their election is happening in 1 week, which we will talk about pretty soon, but the exact same kind of dynamic is happening where Angela Merkel and the CSU coalition that she leads, she's been in power for a few decades at this point. And even though she's been pretty popular throughout from the beginning to the end, a lot of people just want change. They want something new, and they want and usually as a party is the incumbent for longer and longer, frustration starts to build, as usually expectations are almost never met by the ruling party. So for that, Justin Trudeau is having a harder and harder time governing because of his decline in popularity time over time. So that's why he called the snap election, but it's backfiring partially because many people are not viewing him in the right way, or rather, many people are not viewing him positively for starting another election, because again, it's in the middle of COVID-19 and a Delta variant surge in Canada. So let's actually compare each of the parties. There are 5 main parties in Canada. Actually, there is a 6th one, but we'll talk about that last. So we have the Liberal Party. The Liberal Party is like the Democratic Party, except a little bit more liberal than the Democratic Party. And then the Conservative Party is, you could say it's between the British style of the Conservative Party and the United States version of the Republican Party. It's between those two parties on the political spectrum. But Erin O'Toole recently has been putting the Conservative Party a little bit more left than it usually is, and that's mainly to get more moderate voters who are willing to change parties from the Liberals to the Conservatives. So he's adjusting his policies a little bit to be more liberal. But nonetheless, on a usual basis, the Conservative Party, pretty conservative, but it's not like that kind of cultural conservativeness that you see with today's Republican Party. That's actually more similar to the 6th party, which is called the People's Party, which we'll talk about last. The Bloc Québécois, or I guess the Quebecans, they have their own party, and that's somewhat similar to, what is that similar to? It would be similar to, well, there's not there's not really much of a comparison in the United States because it's really only a 2-party system. But if we look at the United Kingdom, the Quebecian bloc is somewhat similar to the Scottish National Party, the SNP. They are both parties are relatively left-wing. The Bloc Québécois are center-left, and they essentially advocate for Quebecian values, for French values, somewhat similar to how the SNP values Scottish nationalism and Scottish policies. So that's how you would equate the Bloc Québécois. And then we also have the New Democratic Party. The New Democratic Party is similar to today's progressive wing of the Democratic Party, where it is center left to left wing. So it would be on the range between Adam Schiff and Pramila Jayapal in terms of the political spectrum. It's between the establishment Democratic bloc and the progressive Democratic bloc. So that party is led by Jagmeet Singh, and they actually have been rising in popularity. It's been a little bit slow, but Compared to last election, they're actually doing better in the polls. In the last election, they won with around 16% of the vote. According to polls, they are now at 20% of the vote. So that's pretty good for the New Democratic Party. And actually, the New Democratic Party has been rising in popularity because Canada is relatively left-leaning, but they elected Justin Trudeau primarily for the purpose of being progressive, for enacting reforms, for being a progressive candidate. But he has turned out to be more like Barack Obama, so that's why a lot of people have moved over to the New Democratic Party, which is somewhat similar to, I guess, more inclined to actually act on progressive policies. So that's where the New Democratic Party comes in. And then you have the Green Party. Green Party, as always, is focused on green politics. And they earned 6.55% of the vote last time. Here, they're expected to earn about 4% of the vote. They're not that big of a party in Canada, but they're just big enough to earn seats in the parliament. And then finally, we have the sixth party. Where is it? Well, in 2019, we saw the party, but it was relatively small at that time. It's the People's Party. The People's Party of Canada is essentially similar to today's version of the Republican Party, especially when it comes to the issue of culture. That is where the People's Party resonate with. And even though in the 2019 election they didn't really have that many votes, if we look at current polls, they're polling enough to the point where they can earn seats in the parliament. They are over 5% of the vote, and they are polling around the same as the Bloc Québécois. So there is a surge, or I guess there is a growth of right-wing politics in Canada. And it's following the path of the United States. Whatever happens in the United States happens around the world. And what we saw in 2016 was a rise in right-wing politics, and that has kind of been echoed throughout the entire world in places like Germany with the AfD, in the United Kingdom with UKIP, and then you have a slew of other nations like and regimes like Robert Duterte's in the Philippines, Myanmar, and a bunch of other countries that have followed through with more right-wing politics. So Canada is essentially another country that's following through with that, and that's why we're expected to see the People's Party gain some traction. They are a populist right-wing party that appeals to, I guess you could say, the forgotten ones. So that's what's happening with the Canada snap election. It is going to happen one day from now, and at this moment, it seems like the Liberals are going to have the same seats as they did before. And the way that voting in Canada works is similar to the way that voting in the United Kingdom works, which is that the Conservative Party in the United Kingdom, they could tie with the Liberals in terms of margins, but have more seats than the Liberal Party, or I guess the Labour Party in the United Kingdom. And that's because it's how people vote. It's where the Labour Party constituents are and where the Conservative Party constituents are. Because the Conservative Party in the United Kingdom is much more spread out, so that they can win by like 60% of the vote. But the Labour Party votes, they're essentially wasted votes. It's kind of similar to the United States and their form of gerrymandering, but it's much more of a natural gerrymander than a political or a partisan gerrymander that is instituted by the politicians. But basically, Canada is like the inverse of the United Kingdom, where instead of the Conservatives having the edge, the Liberals have the advantage. And that is because of where the Liberals are and where Conservatives are. So that means even though in the last election, the Conservatives, by the popular vote, won by 1%, nonetheless, they still gained, or nonetheless, the Liberals still had the plurality of seats in the government. And we can expect the same thing to happen here. Even though Justin Trudeau wanted a majority. It seems like that at this point it's going to be a near even election, which means that Justin Trudeau will most likely end up with the same amount of seats that he did in 2019. So that's the situation at hand in the Canada federal election, and we will have a video on coming out September 21st, simply talking about the results and talking more about Justin Trudeau. So that's the end of this video. Hope you enjoyed it. This video is now adjourned, and I'll see you in the next one.